In the world order, you have a top hierarchy of first-tier rank of dynastic families composed really of the old surviving aristocracies of Europe, the black nobility they're called. They're called the black nobility because they came from the darker strain in the aristocracy of Europe. And the old Viking, blue-eyed, blonde aristocrats, more or less, were pushed into the background, or they intermarried with the black nobility and became contaminated. And this is what you have. Of course, the surviving royal family in Europe today is the royal family of England, and they have been black nobility since the 12th century, when the Este family of Italy married into the British royal family. So the first rank, first tier is the old aristocracies of Europe, plus what they call their Hofjuden, their court Jews, which are the Rothschilds and families of that nature, who are able to raise money for them and keep them functioning. Now, in the second tier of world dynastic families, the world order, you have the families who themselves are enormously rich and powerful, but their duty is to serve as courtiers to the first tier of dynastic families. And people in that category are the Rockefellers, the Harrimans, the Morgans, and so forth. Now you have a third tier of dynastic families who serve the second tier. They're never allowed to approach the real top people in the first tier, but they can only serve through serving the second tier. And these are families like the George Herbert Walker Bush family. George Herbert Walker was president of W.A. Harriman Company, and the Bush family's entire career in banking was to serve the Harriman interests, who in turn served the Rothschilds. So that's why I began to use the term about Bush as a dynastic family in the world order of the third tier. And it was picked up, and I see it popping up everywhere. They say, George Bush is a third tier family. They don't even know what they're talking about. They don't explain it because they don't know how to.
Study suggests Adolf Hitler had Jewish and African ancestors. Adolf Hitler may have had Jewish and African ancestors, according to a recent DNA study by Belgian researchers. In the decades since Adolf Hitler's death, the Nazi leader's ancestry has been a subject of rampant speculation and intense controversy. Some have suggested that his father, Alois, born to an unwed woman named Maria Schicklgruber, was the illegitimate child of Leopold Frankenberger, a young Jewish man whose family employed her as a maid. She subsequently married Johann Georg Heidler, a later spelled Hitler, whose surname her son adopted. Others have claimed that Alois' biological father was also the grandfather of Hitler's mother, Clara Posel, making Adolf the product of an incestuous marriage. To unravel the mystery of the Führer's roots, the Belgian journalist Jean-Paul Mulders teamed up with Mark Vermeeren, a historian who has written extensively about Hitler and his ancestors. The duo collected saliva samples from 39 of the infamous dictator's living relatives, including a great-nephew, Alexander Stuart Houston, who lives in New York, and an Austrian cousin identified only as Norbert H. Tests were then conducted to reveal the sample's principal haplogroups, which are sets of chromosomes that geneticists use to define specific populations. Writing in the Flemish language magazine Knack, Mulders reported that the relative's most dominant haplogroup, known as E1b1b, is rare in Western Europeans but common among North Africans, and particularly the Berber tribes of Morocco, Algeria, Libya, and Tunisia. It is also one of the major founding lineages of the Jewish population, present in 18 to 20% of Ashkenazi Jews and 8.6 to 30% of Sephardic Jews. In other words, Hitler's family tree may have included Jewish and African ancestors. The tragic irony of the discovery, of course, is that Hitler's Nazi regime systematically wiped out an estimated two-thirds of Europe's Jewish population between 1933 and 1945. People of African descent were also considered enemies of the Aryans, whose supposed racial purity and superiority were central to the Mein Kampf author's lethal rhetoric. As Mulders put it in the Knack article, one can from this postulate that Hitler was related to people whom he despised. This is an archived page. Chapter 1. Hitler 1889 to 1936, Hubris. by Ian Kershaw W. Norton and Company. The third possibility is that Adolf Hitler's grandfather was Jewish. Rumors to that effect circulated in Munich cafes in the early 1920s, and were fostered by sensationalist journalism of the foreign press during the 1930s. It was suggested that the name Hitler was Jewish, revealed that he could be traced to a Jewish family called Hitler in Bucharest, and even claimed that his father had been sired by Baron Rothschild, in whose house in Vienna his grandmother had allegedly spent some time as a servant. But the most serious speculation about Hitler's supposed Jewish background has occurred since the Second World War, and is directly traceable to the memoirs of the leading Nazi lawyer and Governor-General of Poland, Hans Frank, dictated in his Nuremberg cell while awaiting the hangman. Frank claimed that he had been called in by Hitler towards the end of 1930 and shown a letter from his nephew William Patrick Hitler, the son of his half-brother Alois, who had been briefly married to an Irish woman, threatening, in connection with the press stories circulating about Hitler's background, to expose the fact that Hitler had Jewish blood flowing in his veins. Allegedly commissioned by Hitler to look into his family history, Frank reportedly discovered that Maria Anna Schicklgruber had given birth to her child, while serving as a cook in the home of a Jewish family called Frankenberger in Graz. Not only that, Frankenberger Sr. had reputedly paid regular installments to support the child on behalf of his son, around 19 years old at the birth, until the child's 14th birthday. Letters were allegedly exchanged for years between Maria Anna Schicklgruber and the Frankenbergers.